Ever feel like the world's gotten really good at being bad?
Mm-hmm.
Like the temptations are
Yeah.
sneakier,
Yeah.
the lines are blurrier,
Yeah.
you're not alone.
Right.
And the wild part is, someone called this out decades ago.
Wow.
We're diving into a talk today from, of all things, 1973 Elder David B. Haight's Power of Evil.
Okay.
Get this, he was worried about the exact 60 things blowing up our feeds and now pornography,
Yeah.
people losing their moral compass, even questioning if God's still around. Spooky, right?
It's like looking in a dusty old mirror and seeing our reflection staring back, isn't it? And it goes to show some things never really change. We might have fancier ways of being tempted now, but underneath, it's the same human struggle with good and evil playing out.
Okay, so 1973, picture Vietnam War protests, Watergate about to explode, and this feeling of everything coming unglued. That's the world Elder Haight stepped into with this message. And it wasn't a, hey, let's be nice kind of talk, you know.
Definitely not. He used this poem by Van Dyke, which I bet you've heard before. 4 things a man must learn to do if he would make his record true.
Right.
It's catchy, but Haight uses it like a battle plan almost, because those 4 things are not just life tips, they're weapons against the darkness he's about to unpack.
All right, so hit us with this poem. What were these 4 must-dos, and how do they become even more relevant in our crazy 2024 world?
Okay, number 1, to think without confusion clearly. Even back then, with the information age just starting, that was getting tough. But now, W-do. We're drowning in clickbait, 24/7 news cycles, everyone's shouting their opinions online. It's like our brains are the new battleground for clarity.
Oh, tell me about it. It's exhausting just trying to figure out what's true anymore. Feels like that's exactly the kind of mental fog evil would love for us to be stuck in, right?
Exactly. Makes it that much easier to manipulate us, to make us doubt ourselves, to fall for things we wouldn't if we were thinking straight. Haight was onto something huge there.
Okay, so clear thinking. Check. What's the next line of defense, according to this poetic battle plan?
Number 2, to love his fellow men sincerely. That's a tall order ANY day, but especially NW. Our world feels like it's splitting down the middle, politically, religiously, you name it. It's so easy to fall into that us versus them trap.
And if everyone's the enemy, then genuine love, compassion, that goes out the window. Which, I'm guessing, plays right into evil's hands, doesn't it?
100%. That breakdown of love, of seeing each other as human, that's fertile ground for evil to take root. Division, suspicion, judging those are its weapons too, not just the big sins we think of.
Okay, so we've got clear thinking, sincere love. What's the next piece of armor we're going to need?
This one's about walking the walk. To act from honest motives purely. Haight's not just talking about avoiding crime here. It's deeper. It's about those little compromises we make when no one's watching.
The white lies, the everyone else is doing it excuses, that slow erosion of integrity.
Exactly. And those tiny cracks, that's where darkness seeps in. One compromise makes the next easier to justify, and before you know it, you're miles from where you thought you stood.
It's like that saying, the only way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. Evil loves those small bites, right? Which brings us to the big one, the foundation of this whole thing, to trust in God and heaven securely.
And if the first 3 were tough in 73, this one's like climbing Everest in flip-flops today. We are bombarded with messages that faith is naive, that we're on our own.
Which is wild to me, because Haight doesn't even stop there. He goes right from this almost comforting poem into a passage from Revelation. And not the happy rainbow-filled kind either.
Yeah, he quotes Revelation 12:12, "Woe to the inhabitants of the earth, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath." Talk about a mood shift. We went from poetry slam to spiritual warfare real quick.
Knowing Elder Haight, he wasn't pulling any punches. He was a tell-it-like-it-is kind of leader. So when he uses words like woe and beware, he means it. Like, this isn't a suggestion, folks. It's a 5-alarm fire for the soul.
And he's not being metaphorical either. He believed in a real devil, a real adversary that wants to mess us up. And that's where things get interesting, because even back then, that wasn't exactly a popular opinion. People thought the devil was like a Halloween costume.
Which, to be fair, is a pretty common thought even today. Like, sure, evil exists, but the devil, a bit much, isn't it?
Right. But Haight was like, hold my scriptures. He understood that brushing off evil as some cartoon villain leaves us totally unprepared for how it really works. He actually uses a really smart analogy to explain this. Electricity, which in the 70s was probably the closest thing they had to magic.
Right. Everything was becoming electric, but most people didn't get how it worked, just that it could shock you good.
Exactly. And Haight said, It's like that with evil. We can't see it directly, but we sure see what it does. He said you might not see electricity, but you know it's real when you flip a switch and the lights come on,
Huh.
or when you get zapped.
Okay, that's actually really clever. So he's saying we can't dismiss evil just because it's not always obvious, because its effects are everywhere. It's like we don't see the internet, but we see how going viral can rock the world in an instant, for good or bad. And in 1973, those shocks of evil were already starting.
Oh, absolutely. He called out pornography specifically, which even back then was becoming more accessible. And he talked about this allure of pleasure at any price, this idea that instant gratification trumps everything else. Sound familiar?
Dude, he basically described the internet in a nutshell, and it didn't even exist yet. But okay, so he's laid this groundwork that evil is real, it's subtle, and it preys on our desires. And he tells this story, this anecdote about a young man that really brings it all home. And this story, even though it's from the 70s, it's like looking in a mirror for today.
It's eerie how relevant it still is. So we
Yeah.
don't get the young man's name, but we get a clear picture. Like, he boasts of you, good kid, wants to fit in, he's into skiing, wants to be on the high school team, but he needs better equipment.
Well,
Relatable, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Especially in our world of gotta have it NLW and the latest gadgets. We've all been tempted by that next best thing. So where's the turning point? Where did things start to go sideways for this kid?
So to get the money for these fancy skis, he takes a job. Not a bad thing on the surface, right? But it means working Sundays and evenings. And that's where those first little compromises start happening. He starts missing church, missing seminary.
Hold up, for those who might not know, what's seminary?
Good call. It's this early morning religious class that Latter-day Saint teenagers take before school, so missing it, it's not just skipping class, it's missing out on that spiritual boost at a really crucial time.
Gotcha. So this kid's missing those chances to connect with his faith, with other people who share his values, and I'm guessing that creates a void that something else rushes in to fill.
Exactly. He's spending more time with his new ski buddies who may not share those same values and less time with his family. And it's not this huge rebellious shift. It's gradual. He's tired from work, doesn't feel like waking up early for seminary anymore. It's just this one-time mentality that's so easy to fall into.
And that's what makes this story so powerful, because it's not some over-the-top cautionary tale. It's so relatable. We've all been there or known someone who has making those little compromises, thinking we can handle it, that it won't really affect us.
And that's the insidious thing about evil. It thrives in those gray areas, those it's not a big deal moments. So this kid, he starts smoking to fit in, then it's weed, then harder drugs. He moves out, distances himself from anything that reminds him of his faith, his family. And you're right, it's heartbreaking because it feels so avoidable.
And what gets me is that Haight isn't saying this only happens to problem kids. He specifically says even the very elect can be deceived, which, again, for those not super familiar with LDS lingo, basically means even the people who are really trying to live right, they're not immune.
Exactly. And that's why he goes on to talk about the family as a fortress of faith. This isn't about locking kids away from the world. It's about creating a space where they can build up their spiritual immunity, you know?
Okay, so how do we do that?
Yeah.
Because he tells this other story, this time about a bishop interviewing a young woman and what she says. Chilling.
Right. She tells him, we never discuss it at home, meaning faith, religion, any of the tough questions, it's just not talked about. And that is what Haight calls out as the real danger zone.
Because if faith is something you only wear on Sundays, or never even talk about how do you build that moral muscle, it's like sending someone into a food fight with an empty stomach.
Yeah. Perfect analogy. You're going to get creamed. And I think that's what Haight was getting at with this idea of homes being fortresses of faith. It's not about sheltering kids from the world's realities, but giving them a safe space to wrestle with those realities with faith as their foundation.
So it's less about never seeing a bad thing, more about having the tools to process it when you do.
Exactly. It's like we teach kids to look both ways before crossing the street, right? We don't just let them loose in traffic, assuming they'll figure it out.
Right.
Faith needs that kind of intentional teaching too, especially with all the spiritual traffic whizzing by online now.
Which makes me think back to that Van Dyke poem, those 4 things, for a true record. It's not enough to just tell kids, hey, think clearly, love people, be honest, trust God. Those have to be active practices, right?
100%. And that's where the fortress comes in. It's about creating a family culture where you do those things together. Have family scripture studies, sure, but also talk about the tough stuff you're reading. Model what it looks like to disagree respectfully, to admit when you're struggling.
Because if we're pretending faith is always easy, always comfortable, we're not preparing kids for reality, are we?
Nope. We're basically setting them up to be blindsided the first time life throws a curveball. And guess who's waiting to comfort them when they're doubting, hurting, feeling alone? Yeah, not usually the good guys.
Oof, good point. It's like that saying, nature abhors a vacuum. If there's no faith, something elsey will rush in to fill that space. But, okay, so we've covered the doom and gloom part. Evil is real, it's sneaky, and we got to be proactive. But I don't think Haight was trying to freak people out, right? What's the hopeful side of this whole thing?
You got it. His message was ultimately empowering. He knew that understanding evil is the first step to overcoming it. And he offers some really practical advice, even though it might sound simple on the surface. He says the armor we need is living the commandments.
Okay, easy for him to say from the pulpit, right? But what does that actually look like day to day? Give me the practical 2024 version.
It's about those small, consistent choices. Choose to be honest when it'd be easier to lie than strapping on a piece of armor. Choose kindness over judgment. Bam, spiritual shield activated.
So it's not some magical force field. It's more like building up calluses on your soul through good choices.
Exactly. And the more you do it, the stronger those calluses get. It's like anything else, practice makes perfect. And the family fortress we talked about, that's the training ground. It's where you practice those virtues, support each other, and build up that spiritual resilience together.
Which is so important, because if this whole deep dive has taught us anything, it's that evil is really good at its job, you know? It's had centuries to figure out our weaknesses.
Right. And the good news is we have something even more powerful on our side.
Mm-hmm.
Agency. God gave us the ability to choose. So, yeah, evil's going to tempt us, but it can't make us do anything. That power rests with us.
Which is both empowering and terrifying, right? Like, no pressure, but the fate of your soul is riding on you choosing the right ski trip, so to speak. But I appreciate Haight laying it all out there. No sugarcoating, just straight talk about the very real battle we're in.
And that honesty, that willingness to have those tough conversations, that's what makes all the difference. Because once we see the battlefield clearly, once we understand the stakes, we can actually start fighting back effectively.
So final thought for our listeners out there. If Elder Haight were giving this power of evil talk today, in 2024, with all our modern craziness, what do you think he'd be warning us about? What are the sneaky ski trips we're facing that might not even look dangerous at first glance? Something to ponder, because this fight, it's not some abstract thing. It's happening right here, right now in the choices we make every single day.
And that is a deep dive worth taking. Thanks for joining us.